Awesome. So thank you all for coming to my talk today. So just right off the bat, I just want to do some acknowledgements to Earth Sciences New Zealand, formerly known as NEWA, hereby referred to as NEWA for the rest of this talk, and as well to Land Information New Zealand, Toi Te Whenua, for funding all of this work. So thank you to them. So before we get into it, I just want to talk about the challenges of lagrosiphons. So first introduced into New Zealand in the 1950s. Why it's a problem: it's an extremely fast-growing plant. It can occupy the bed down to around 6 meters depth. It forms really dense monocultures, displacing our native species, and it spreads via fragments, and that's something just to keep in the back of your mind. And as well, it not only displaces our natives, it also impacts our hydro generation, as well as recreational activities. And you can see there from the photo, this is Lake Dunstan, dense monoculture, not a lot happening there apart from lagrosiphon growth, and this is essentially what we're really aiming to prevent from happening. So what control tools do we have to manage this at present? So we've got hand weeding, so that's divers removing single weeds and removing those from the lakes. That's when you've got really small populations. And then moving around to the right, we've got herbicide control, so this is much larger concentrations, similar to what we saw at Lake Dunstan in the previous photo. Then we've got hand cutting, and we're only really using hand cutting at boat ramps in habitat saturated areas, so essentially all we're trying to do there is clear a pathway for boats and trailers to exit and into the water, and the hope that they're not going to move fragments elsewhere. And then finally as well, we've got suction dredging. This is essentially an underwater vacuum cleaner where divers are going around and vacuuming up plants, and then they're deposited into essentially a large sieve there, and the water can drain out but the plants can't. But essentially what we have is a missing tool for eradication. At the time we didn't have something that we could deploy under all conditions, something that we could scale on in a large context, something that was cost effective. So we did have the suction dredging that kind of sits in between the hand weeding as well as the herbicide control, but it's quite bulky, we can't really do it in smaller areas, and it's quite manual as well. And we also want something that has a minimal environmental impact. So with the suction dredging as well, there's quite a lot of sedimentation in that occurs with that. And I've just put this photo here in Paddock Bay, Lake Wanaka. This is essentially what we're trying to protect and what we want to get these waterways back to. So what is the missing tool? So benthic barriers, basically what are they? They're a geotextile that we lay over top of the weeds, so very similar to the terrestrial environment. So what we're trying to do there is block out the sunlight and prevent the photosynthesis from occurring so the plants can't grow. They're made typically from hessian or jute material, and the sediment builds up on top of these mats, and basically it turbocharges how we want to kill the plants. So the mats sort of act as that first layer, the sediment then accumulates on top of those, turbocharge, kill the plants faster. That's what we're trying to achieve. And these are laid down by divers onto the weed beds, and then they're pinned to the bottom of the lake beds or river beds. And essentially we're hoping the weeds die off in 3 to 9 months. The more light that they can get, if there's less sedimentation, they'll last longer. And we're basically just trying to kill those as fast as we can. And this is essentially our key eradication tool. So a little bit of context as to how these came about. So there was some research done in Ireland in the mid-2010s, and then from that Deb Hofstra and John Clayton wrote a really good paper about hessian use in New Zealand. And essentially they were trialling a number of different materials for our native species and the aquatic species that we have here in New Zealand. Basically just trying to understand the stuff that worked in Ireland, is that going to work in New Zealand? And they trialled jute, which is one type of plant material, hessian, the other, and coconut fibre. And their findings from the paper were that hessian is fit for purpose in New Zealand, and that should be the one that we look to utilise. So from there, on the recommendation of NEWA in 2014, we, under the direction of Linz, we basically rolled out some trials in Lake Wanaka using the hessian material. And since then, we've done 65 hectares of hessian control throughout Lake Wanaka and some other water bodies like the Kowara River. The product we're using is manufactured in Sri Lanka. And again, just keep this in mind, I'll come back to this, at why this is a little bit of a problem for us. And we're predominantly using this in eradication sites. And I've included this photo here. This is taken off Google Earth. All this here is our hessian that we've laid in the Kawerau River. And I just thought it's quite cool that we can actually see what we're doing from space. So something quite cool there. And you may be familiar with hessian because it's the same material that makes your bags for your reusable bags at the supermarket. So next time you go shopping and you use one of these, you can think, well, I could eradicate some weeds with this if I wanted. And then sort of moving on, so from those initial trials in 2015, we had some really good successes, and we've really tried to scale up this as a tool, as I've mentioned, for eradication. So now we're using this as a tool for landscape scale control. We're using around 10 hectares of the matting annually, and each day the divers at a really good site, they can lay around 3,750 square meters. So essentially that's 3 of these bales. So each bale has 10 rolls in it, and each roll is 125 square meters. So the mats are 25 meters by 5 meters. So yeah, we're really scaling up what we can do, and you can just sort of see the amount of in quantity in that we're purchasing of this hessian matting. And over the 10-year period as well, we've had quite a lot of contractor innovation. It's sort of like anything. If you've got someone working with something quite regularly, they're going to sort of see where the flaws are and where they can improve use of that tool. So some of the really cool things that the contractors have done over the years is that they're now pre-rolling all the hessian on shore. So they're rolling it on using onto PVC pipes, and they're pre-rolling it, and they were just rolling it on the ground, and then they've innovated now and built these sort of purpose-built rollers so that it's off the ground, nothing's getting caught in it. And as well, the fact when they're rolling it like that, they can pre-tension the rolls themselves, so that when they're re-rolled underwater, they're already pre-tensioned, so then we're not getting any air pockets and that kind of thing when we're trying to kill the weed. And again, we're just trying to get it as flat as possible, kill the weeds, happy days. So we're always just sort of aiming for constant 1% improvements. And some further innovations from the contractors. So you can see this is them taking the pre-rolled rolls out, but the big issue here is they don't have much space on the boat, so they're you could sort of take 5 or 6 rolls before they'd have to come back. And then for those that know about diving with the dive tables and that, we want to try and maximize the time that the divers have got out in the water, because there's only a specific amount of time that they can dive in a day. Having to surface, come back in, it just messes with their dive tables as well, so it sort of decreases what they can lay in a day. So just in this previous year, they've invested in this barge, so they'll actually tow that out with them. We've got some rolls on there with no hessian, but they'll pre-roll. They can take a whole day's worth of hessian out for the day and essentially get a lot more hessian laid, which is really good. So some disadvantages, as I mentioned earlier, manufactured overseas. So this is, I guess, our Achilles heel. This is a big problem in the sense that there's potential supply chain issues. There's shipping delays. We've seen in recent years there can be major shipping delays from quite small incidences. There's quality control issues. Again, we're quite a small fish for what they're producing. So, and often as well, we won't use the product for 6 months or so. So if there's a quality control issue, we can't open up every single one of these and check every single roll. So yeah, there's quite issues with the manufacturing side. We do have to purchase it in bulk as well, so we have to sort of try and decide what we're going to purchase, and then if we do get additional funding, we're limited by the amount of hessian that we have. So there's sort of a lot of to's and fro's. We also need quite a lot of storage, and as mentioned, the hessian itself, because it is quite a flat product, in high energy environments, it won't hold the sediment as well, because there's if there's boats or if it's a river environment or there's waves, it can just wash it off, and that lagrosiphon will stay alive underneath. And we also find, because it's a plant-based material, it will degrade in sunlight. So what's the solution? Yeah, it'd be good if we could put sheep in, but unfortunately, use their wool. So I was doing some investigations about what alternative products are out there, and we actually found a fit-for-purpose product for a terrestrial environment. Hasn't been used in the aquatic environment. The wool itself is sourced locally in Banks Peninsula, which is really good. It's also manufactured in Christchurch, which is where I'm based, so we can work quite closely with the supplier. And the cost as well is similar to hessian. But before we, I guess, go get all excited, we have to actually understand, is this going to work? So there's almost is this going to work? And then there's like, will the divers actually like this? Like, is it even going to sink? Like, there's a lot of small things that we have to sort of iron out before we can continue with trials. So we sort of did a bit of a proof of concept. So this was basically just give it to the divers, put it out, and we'll see how it interacts in the typical environment. So we did 2 trials in Lake Wanaka, one with a 300 GSM, so GSM stands for grams per square metre, so that's just the density of the product, and one with 500. We deployed both of those products alongside some traditional Hessian matting to get a bit of a gauge as to how they interact in the environment and what results we get. So 6 months post-deployment, the wool mats exceeded expectation. There was extremely high sedimentation rate, which is really, really good. One thing we weren't expecting is the wool fibres themselves, once they become waterlogged, it's kind of like a bicycle spokes in a wheel. They sort of tension quite evenly in the mat, and it kind of made the whole mat stronger, which is not something that we're used to, so that was a nice surprise. More importantly, it killed the Lagersiphon. And from there, LINs were happy to engage NEWA basically to undertake some scientific research just to understand how is this going to, what other things are we not thinking about with this. And you can just see the divers had to use their knife basically to crack off how much sediment was sitting on this, and you can sort of see the wool fibres in that there. So yeah, very, very happy with the initial trials. So some key findings from NEWA. The wool mats didn't raise the nutrient levels. That was one thing we were worried about, being a natural product from sheep. The 300 GSM was the preferred density of wool, and the plants themselves as well supported native plant growth. So the seeds, the native seeds, can still germinate once the Lagersiphon's dead. Lagersiphon only grows from fragments, so then the natives can grow up through it, which is really good. They found it was more durable than Hessian. It was self-anchoring as well, just from the weight of the wool. And they also found that it was less suited to some high rocky environments, or if there are smaller sites that are higher nutrients, potentially we want to look at alternatives. But essentially the message was green light, we're good to go for some more trials, which is really, really good. So we rolled out some more trials in the Kawerau River, so we know that it now works in a lake environment. So lakes are a little bit easier than a high energy environment like a river. So we've deployed a number of different products into the Kawerau River down in Queenstown. This is the picture earlier. So we've scaled up and we've rolled a bunch of mats out. So we've done a 300 GSM of wool Hessian blend. We've done a 300 GSM of wool only, and we've done a 200 GSM of wool only. And this is quite a unique situation. The river level was so low, the divers could, not really diving there, but essentially they're walking out the Hessian before it goes into the deeper part of the river. But this is essentially what they're normally doing underwater, but this is quite a unique way to be able to see more or less. They're rolling it out, someone's coming behind and pinning it before it goes into the deeper water. So the trials there are ongoing, but they are looking promising. So differences in the product. I guess keeping in mind that over the last 10 years, all of the tools we've created have been around the Hessian product, and then we've introduced this new product, and there's quite a lot of just subtle differences that we are working through. So the first one was the size of the mats. They were 2.2 meters by 50. That again, it just changes how we lay it and that kind of thing. 2.2 is too small, so we had to go back to the manufacturer and try to get them to sew them together, and just how they work with their needle beds. We do have limitations as to how big the needle beds are. They don't necessarily have 5 meter needle beds because people don't really need wool that wide kind of thing. So there's little things like that that we're working through with the suppliers. It is a lot more bulky. You can see the wool on top there versus the Hessian, and there's 10 rolls, 10 sheets in here. So there's quite a big difference in how much bulk there is. The divers were finding as well it's harder to drive the stakes into the material just because it's stretchier. And yeah, there's just little things like that that we are working through, but it is looking promising. So a little bit of a recap. So we started off with Hessian only, and that's what we use for the bulk of the last 10 years. And then we've gone to a Hessian wool hybrid, which is essentially 100 GSM of Hessian, 200 of wool. So it's a combination of the two. And in the Kawerau River now, we're trialling out the wool only product. So we've actually got 2 of these wool products at our stand, so if you do want to come and get your hands on some, you're welcome to come over and have a look. And just some conclusions there overall. So benthic barriers were the missing tool for eradication with Lagersiphon, so it's been really successful at helping us move towards eradication. Hessian itself has been generally quite successful, but we've had those vulnerabilities with the supply chain, which we haven't had any big issues, but we can foresee that if we can't get Hessian for a year, it's going to be a big issue for us. We'll go backwards like anything. So, and because it has to be, it's grown overseas, we have to get it from there. So that's why we want some locally sourced materials. We've found the wool alternative to Hessian, which is really good, and NEWA's research supports this as a tool. And the ongoing trials, essentially we're just trying to find what's the optimum mat density of wool where we can use the least amount of wool and still kill the lacrocyphon. So we're trying to find what that Goldilocks zone is. So hopefully in the next couple months when we get the divers back down there, we'll have some good results. So just some acknowledgements there, just to Tracy and Sean from Toita Whenua, Marcus, my colleague, and to Mary, Dan, and Inigo from Earth Sciences New Zealand, formerly NEWA. And thank you. Any questions?
Just curious about the Lake Wanaka progress. How's it all going?
Lake Wanaka is in a very good state, basically because of the Hessian laying. So we've this year we're looking to move the eradication line further down. So we're basically putting the whole western target zone into the eradication area, which is really, really good. So it's it's progressing really well. There's still a lot of weed to control, but I think now that we know how to use the laying of the benthic barriers to a commercial scale, it's really good. And now that we're out of the western target zone, there's just kind of one continuous, I guess, front that we can sort of push. So we're coming into Roy's Bay, into the township, which again, that's another challenge. There's a lot more people around. Where do we store our Hessian? So there's little things that we've got in front of us, but overall it's progressing really, really well.
And is it sort of reinvading at all?
You still get fragments, but again, it's sort of once you remove those out of the system, and we check all the burrows and everything. So yeah. Yes.
What was the issues with using the wool mapping in high nutrient environment?
So there was concern just with regard to the wool itself being a natural product if it was going to be releasing any nutrients into the water. So NEWA found that in the larger scale lakes such as like Wanaka, all those big areas, it's totally fine to use. If you were using it in a much smaller, I guess maybe like a dune lake or something like that, you might have some issues just with nutrient release. So their recommendation was just to keep it into those larger scale environments.
Did they have a size limit on it?
They didn't specify, they just said larger water bodies. So, but come have a chat to me, Sarah.
The Hessian often has issues with fishing hooks and props, so is it more tolerable to recreational activities?
Yeah, I think fishing hooks definitely always going to be an issue. As we found that the wool itself does become stronger, so potentially it's going to be harder, and ideally you just want the line to snap. I know our divers gather a lot of fishing lures and that kind of thing, but the other good thing for us is we've moved out of the western target zone where a lot of that fishing's happening into Roy's Bay, so there's a lot less fishing happening there. Awesome, thank you.
Thank you very much.